In Rome stands a concrete dome nearly 2,000 years old. No steel holds it up. Nobody has repaired it in centuries. It has outlasted the empire that poured it, a dozen earthquakes, and every army that ever sacked the city. It is still the largest unreinforced concrete dome on Earth. But think about the concrete you actually live with. The parking garage that crumbles in 30 years. The highway bridge the crews are forever patching. We pour the most advanced concrete in history, and it falls apart inside a single lifetime. The Romans mixed a cruder stuff by hand, with no machines and no real chemistry, and parts of it have stood for 2,000 years in the open sea, quietly getting stronger. So either the Romans knew something we have forgotten, or we have been reading their concrete wrong for a very long time. Tonight we solve that, the way the scientists who finally cracked it did. What Roman concrete actually was, and why an empire was built out of it. Why ours fails so fast when theirs refused to. The strange ingredient the Romans dragged across the sea to make it work. And the small white flaw, sitting in plain sight in every Roman wall, that the experts wrote off as sloppy work for 100 years, until someone realized it was the whole secret. By the end, you will understand why we are only now learning to build the way Rome already did. Nobody set out to lose this. That is the first thing to understand. The recipe was not stolen or hidden or burned. It simply fell out of use, and the world spent the next 1,000 years not noticing what it had let go of. Start with what the stuff even was, because it is not what most people picture. When we say the Romans built in stone, we are usually only half right. The Colosseum, the Great Baths, the harbours, the aqueducts, the Pantheon itself, the real structural muscle behind all of it was concrete. The Romans had a recipe for an artificial rock you could pour into any shape, and it changed what a building could be. An arch made of cut stone needs a master mason and months of fitting. Concrete, you mix and pour. Suddenly you could roof a space the width of a city square with a single curved shell, and the Romans did, again and again, across 3 continents. Take that dome in Rome again, the Pantheon. Stand under it, and you are standing beneath a single curved shell of concrete wider than a basketball court, with a round open hole at the very top, letting the daylight and the rain straight in. There is no steel in it and no hidden frame. It holds itself up purely by its shape and the strength of the material. And the Romans were cleverer than they get credit for. They packed heavy rubble into the mix down at the base, where the load is greatest, then switched to lighter volcanic rock as the dome curved up toward the opening, so the top weighs less and presses down gentler. They were tuning the recipe by hand, course by course, 2,000 years ago. Their mix had 3 parts: a binder of lime made by burning limestone in a kiln, a mass of rubble and broken rock for the body, and one special ingredient that turned ordinary mortar into something that would set hard as stone and stay that way for centuries. That ingredient is where the mystery begins, because the Romans did not find it just anywhere. They went looking for it, and they were willing to ship it a very long way. The secret ingredient was volcanic ash. Near the Bay of Naples, in the shadow of the volcanoes, there was a particular sandy ash the Romans prized above all others. Mixed with lime and water, this ash did something remarkable. It set through a chemical reaction rather than by simply drying, which meant it would even harden underwater, where ordinary mortar just dissolves into mud. The Romans understood the result without understanding the chemistry. They knew this grey volcanic sand made the strongest, most durable concrete they could produce, and they wanted it everywhere. This is the trick the whole empire ran on. Plain lime mortar needs the air to harden, so it can never truly set while it is wet. The volcanic ash rewrote that rule. Something in the ash reacted with the lime and the water to grow a tough, stone-like binder that did not care whether it sat in dry air or under the tide. For a people obsessed with harbours and bridges and seaside baths, a cement that hardened underwater was not a luxury. It was the one thing that let them build out into the sea at all. So they shipped it. Barges and sea vessels carried that volcanic ash out of the bay and across the Mediterranean to harbour projects hundreds of miles away. Think about what that means. An empire was hauling sand across the sea at enormous cost because the engineers knew that this exact ingredient was the difference between a pier that lasted a season and a pier that lasted forever. They were right in a way they could never have measured. Because this next part should not be possible. The Roman harbours built with that sea-mix concrete are still down there. 2,000 years of waves, of salt water, of the exact conditions that chew modern marine concrete to pieces in a few decades, and the Roman stuff did not just survive it. The seawater soaked into the concrete and slowly grew new crystals inside it, rare minerals knitting through the structure over the centuries, locking it tighter. The ocean that should have destroyed it was making it stronger instead. We build sea defences today that we expect to replace within a human lifetime. The Romans built them to be improved by the sea. So why on earth did we ever stop? This is where the title gets complicated, because Lost for 2,000 years is a good headline and only half true. The Romans did not take a secret to the grave. The truth is slower and stranger than that. When the Western Roman world came apart, the giant building projects stopped. There were no more emperors commissioning domes the size of public squares, no more imperial harbours, no more machinery of state to quarry lime and ship volcanic ash across a sea. The grand concrete tradition was tied to a scale of wealth and organisation that simply ceased to exist. The knowledge did not get deleted, it got disused. The recipes sat in old texts that fewer and fewer people could read, describing materials almost nobody was mixing anymore, and over the generations the practical skill of it quietly drained away. It is tempting to imagine knowledge as something written down and therefore safe. It is not. A recipe is only alive as long as people are actually making it. Stop building the great harbours, and within a few generations nobody alive has ever mixed the stuff. Nobody knows by feel how the lime should look, or how the ash should behave when the blend is right. The words survive on the page and the skill dies in the hands. That is how a civilization loses something precious without anyone ever deciding to throw it away. And then something replaced it that papered over the loss entirely. Much later, builders worked out their own hydraulic cements, and eventually came the modern stuff, the grey powder cement that the entire built world now runs on. It was cheap. It set fast. It was strong right away. It was so convenient that nobody felt the absence of the Roman method at all. Why dig through Latin manuscripts for a slow ancient mortar when the new cement set hard in a day? We did not lose the Roman recipe in a fire. We let it go because we thought we had built something better. And for speed we had. For lasting 2,000 years we had not. Nobody noticed the trade we had made for a very long time. Which brings us to the strangest part of the whole story and the detail that finally broke it open. For 100 years, scientists who studied Roman concrete under the microscope kept seeing something they could not explain. Scattered all through the ancient material were small white lumps, little chunks of lime, millimetres across. And for 100 years, the experts looked at those lumps and came to the same conclusion. Sloppy work. Poor quality control. Evidence that the Romans, for all their success, had simply mixed their concrete carelessly and gotten lucky. The lumps were a flaw. Everyone agreed. Everyone was wrong. The thing nobody had taken seriously was that flaw itself. Because a few years ago, a team of modern researchers looked again and asked an obvious question that 100 years of experts had skipped. What if the lumps were not a mistake? What if the Romans put them there on purpose and we just could not see the point? What they found rewrote the textbook. Those little white lumps are not sloppiness. They are the repair kit. The Romans, it turns out, were mixing their lime in a way that left these reactive chunks distributed all through the concrete-like seeds. And those seeds do something no modern concrete can. They heal cracks. By themselves. With no help from anyone. The clue was in how the Romans made the lime in the first place. Instead of carefully soaking it in water to calm it down, the way a modern mason would, they appear to have thrown the raw, fierce quicklime into the mix straight from the kiln, while it was still violently hot. That hot mixing is what left the reactive lumps behind, baked right into the body of the concrete, dormant, waiting. They were not flaws that slipped through. They were loaded into the material on purpose, ready to wake up the day a crack let water reach them. The mechanism itself is beautifully simple. Concrete cracks. All concrete cracks, it is just what happens as the ground shifts and the weather works on it. In modern concrete, a crack is the beginning of the end because water gets in, spreads, and tears the structure apart from the inside. But in Roman concrete, when a crack opens and water trickles in, the water reaches one of those little lime lumps and dissolves it. The dissolved lime flows into the crack, reacts and recrystallizes into new mineral, hardening right there in the gap. The crack seals itself shut. The wound closes. The very water that destroys our concrete is what triggers the Roman concrete to fix itself. There is something humbling in that, and it is the thing this channel keeps coming back to. The Romans did not have our instruments or our chemistry. They had careful hands, patient observation, and centuries of trying things and remembering what lasted. That older, hands-on way of knowing the world, learning a craft by doing it until it works, is exactly the thread we keep pulling on here. If putting your own hands on the past appeals to you more than just watching it, that is the whole idea behind the Medieval Way store. It starts with the Medieval Bakery collection. The Practical Recipes book walks you through the dishes themselves. The Sourdough Manual is for keeping a living leaven of your own, the slow, old-fashioned way. And the Sourcing Guide tells you where to find the right heritage grain. The bread is where this kitchen begins. Now back to that laboratory, because the researchers were not content to just have a theory. They decided to prove it. They made 2 batches of concrete, one the Roman way with the reactive lime lumps mixed in, one the modern way without them. Then they did the cruelest thing you can do to concrete on purpose. They cracked both samples deliberately, right down the middle, and ran water through the gap over and over to see what would happen. The result was about as clear as science ever gets. In the Roman-style sample, within a couple of weeks, the crack had sealed completely. Water could no longer pass through it at all. The lime had done its work and closed the wound, exactly as the theory predicted. The modern sample, made without those lumps, did what modern concrete always does. It stayed cracked. The water ran straight through it and kept running. 2 recipes, 1 test, and the 2,000-year-old method won without an argument. And the strangest thing about that test is that it was not really new. The real version has been running, full scale, for 2,000 years, out in the weather, on every Roman ruin still standing. The laboratory simply squeezed 20 centuries of rain and frost into a couple of weeks and watched the same thing happen up close. The concrete that could heal, healed. The concrete that could not, failed. Everything past that is detail, so that is the answer to the question we started with. The Pantheon is still standing, and your local parking garage is not, because the Roman material was quietly repairing its own cracks the whole time, and ours never could. It was never magic, and it was never really lost. It was hiding in plain sight, in those little white lumps everyone had been apologizing for. If the Romans solved self-healing concrete 2,000 years ago, The obvious question is why your city is not pouring it right now. The honest answer is that it is complicated, and the modern world made a different bet. Our concrete is wrapped around steel bars for strength, and that steel rusts, which is one of the main reasons our structures fail. The Romans used no steel, so they never had that problem to begin with. Their mix is also slower to reach full strength, and weaker in some of the ways modern engineers care about most. You cannot simply pour ancient Roman concrete into a modern skyscraper and walk away. It was built for a different world, with different demands, and a different idea of how long a thing should last. But the principle, the self-healing lime, the patient durability, the building of something meant to stand for ages rather than decades, that is something engineers are now scrambling to bring back. Modern teams are working to fold the Roman trick into new concrete, to make a material that closes its own cracks and lasts for centuries instead of decades. After 2,000 years, we are not copying the Romans. We are finally catching up to them. This is more than a curiosity. Concrete is the most used building material on the planet, second only to water in the sheer quantity humans move around. And making the cement that binds it is brutally hard on the climate, responsible for a large slice of all the carbon dioxide humanity pumps into the air, somewhere near a 1/12 of the global total. Every time a bridge or a building crumbles after 50 years and has to be torn down and poured again, all of that cost and all of that carbon gets spent twice. Think about the scale of that for a moment. Every city you have ever walked through is mostly concrete, and almost all of it is on a clock, quietly counting down to the day it has to be ripped out and poured all over again. We have built an entire civilization out of a material designed to fail inside a single human lifetime, and we did it knowingly, because failing concrete was cheap and quick, and we were not thinking in centuries. The Romans were. Now imagine concrete that lasts 5 times longer, or 10, because it heals itself. Imagine pouring a seawall once and having it stand for centuries, getting stronger in the salt water instead of dissolving in it. That is not a fantasy. The Romans already did it. The proof has been standing in the sun and sitting on the Mediterranean seabed for 2,000 years, waiting for us to stop calling it a flaw and start asking how it worked. Go back to that dome in Rome, the one with no steel and no repairs, still holding up its own enormous weight after 20 centuries. For a long time we looked at Roman concrete and saw a lucky accident by people less advanced than us. It was the other way around. They built it to outlive them on purpose, and the little white lumps we dismissed as carelessness were the cleverest part of the whole design. We did not lose a recipe. We lost the patience that wrote it. We rebuild the knowledge the modern world poured over. Would you trust a bridge built to heal itself? Subscribe and stay curious.